coming. I had to come early, so...
There was a little tiny grommet in there under where the pressing pin to make it rewind, which was off to the side. So the circuitry in there, I was concerned it got...
This is very obviously a tribute to Rowena Meyers, a lady who many persons in this town over many years. In that spirit, we're going to dispense with our business team. I would like to make a couple of introductions, if I may. I'd like to introduce Carter and Linda Lloyd, who are now the owners of this Meyers house. They're sitting over here, my left. Stand up. They've done an absolutely marvelous job of restoring that house, and very much in keeping. They're very much in keeping with the kind of people Miss Meyers would own the house. And they brought along tonight, just for us to see this evening, a portrait of Miss Meyers that was taken in midlife. It shows what a perfectly beautiful woman she was, and as many of us knew her as a very sprightly old lady. And I will now ask Liz Clement to introduce the program.
Just hold on.
Some of the people in the background are outside and sit. They can see you, they come over and see them.
We have a seat right over here. Well, we thank you very much for turning out tonight. This program is being videotaped as well as recorded so that it can become part of the oral history of Orleans. And it certainly is indicative with this turnout of how much interest there was, or there is still, in Miss Rowena Meyers. Being the chairman of the program committee gives me a little bit leeway in planning things for the whole year. Little did I know that a year ago when we planned this program, or at least put it on the calendar, that there would be so much interest. And so I'm very much indebted to a number of people who have stepped forward to either tell us about Rowena Meyers or to loan us some of the handicrafts and artwork that she produced during her very lengthy and productive years. We're also especially thankful to Henry Sears from Brewster, who is the owner of Miss Meyers' car, and I've been saying for the past few days that it was a 1929 Model 8 Ford, and I've been corrected, it's a 1930 Model 8 Ford, so it's just 1 year younger now. Mr. Sears is here, or was here, standing. Henry, where are you? He's probably out defending his car. Well, in chatting with him before the program started, he did point out that the car had been painted, he thought, twice. Once after she was in an automobile accident in the late 1980s, and the engine has never been reconditioned, and it now has a total of approximately 95,000 miles. So it is really a wonderful tribute to the way they used to make them. I'm also very much indebted to Mrs. Hayes, who was for a number of years Rowena Meyers' neighbor down the street. And she was here yesterday, and we set up this little display of some of the work that Rowena produced over the years. You will notice that there's some of her silver jewelry and some of her very delicate and very highly polished and beautifully finished tollware, and some of the boxes that she decorated, plus gloves that she evidently knit and sold in her little shop. Then Connie down Stokes, who we're going to hear from, has brought us some boxes that she decorated and another piece of tollware. When we thought it was appropriate to thank or make a tribute to Miss Meyers because of her very generous bequest to the Orleans Historical Society, to the Snow Library, and to the Orleans Cemetery Association, I tried to draw together a mailing list so that we could let everyone know that this program is going to be scheduled for tonight. One reaction I had was that people thought, oh, that's great. I often wondered who that little old lady was that owned that big yellow house. Well, I guess as we get older, maybe the younger people tend to look at us that way, but I don't think any of us will have the charisma and the background that Miss Meyers has. And I'm delighted that we have people here tonight who can share firsthand experiences with her. The first person I'm going to call on is Connie Downs Stokes, who knew her in the early 40s. She was a neighbor down the street. And so Connie is going to tell us a little bit about her impressions or what she remembers of Rowena. Now, I told Connie that if she remembers her in the early 1940s, she must have been a toddler at that time. So here we have Connie Downs Stokes.
Well, good evening. As I already told you, I'm Connie Stokes. And if you're wondering why I'm on this program titled Reflection on Rowena Meyers and the Orleans she knew, you know that she wouldn't like this one bit. So if you hear any thunder roll tonight, you know it's Rowena saying, I don't like what you're doing, but I think deep down in her heart she really would be glad that we have recognized such a wonderful person. Back in the spring, Lynn asked me after church one Sunday morning, he said, Connie, did you know Miss Meyers? And I said, I thought a moment, and I said, you mean Rowena? And he said, yes, I mean Rowena. He told me that there was going to be a program about Rowena, and he would like to have me recall what I knew about her. That I never knew what I didn't know Rowena. My part in this program is twofold. First, to share with you from a child's point of view, because I knew her, well, I've known her all my life, obviously, but I knew her in the 30s, late 30s and early 40s. So I want to share that with you from a child's point of view. And secondly, to silence the rumors that Rowena did not like children and she hated men. From my recollection of Rowena, these rumors are very far from the truth. Now, briefly at this time, I wish to thank family members and friends for their invaluable assistance in helping me remember Rowena and Orleans the way we were during my childhood. My cousins Dorothy Downs Cooks, Burl Downs Graff, Beulah Downs Graff, then neighbors Albie and Bessie and his sons Billy and Brian, Edith Nickerson Gill, Janine Perry, Barbara Patton Shearer, and Donald Walsh. Digressing for a moment, in speaking of Janine Perry, I hope you all saw Beach Glass. It was just wonderful. And Rowena introduced me to what we call then sea glass. We don't find sea glass anymore because everything is in cans and aluminum. And I still have my little sea glass that Bill said when we moved up here, you mean you can bring back to the Cape? I said, yes, you can find it. I also reviewed Ruth Barney's book, A History of Early Orleans, that proved, as Rowena said, had many inaccuracies, but it is still a chatty, charming little history of the early days in Orleans. To give you just a little capsule of my background, if anybody really cares. I was born in Boston and grew up in Lexington and spent all my summers on the Cape. My father, Norman, was one of the 6 sons of Anna and Thomas Downs. He was number 5 in the lineup. My maternal grandparents came from England with the French paper company in the late or mid-1880s. I have known Rowena from my early childhood and always knew she had been my Uncle Reggie's sweetheart. Reg was the youngest of the 6 Downs brothers, very lean, tall, dark, and handsome. He was born in 1902, and Rowena was born 2 years later in 1904. Rowena and her younger sister Edith had many beaux, but my cousins and I always knew Reg was a very special beau. In later years, she would always ask about all the family, but she was especially interested in knowing about Reg and his children. Rowena's father, Hiram Meyers, was the first principal of Orleans High School, and for some years town clerk. Later he became the librarian in Snow Library. He married the widow of Captain Simeon Mayo, a lady 18 years his senior. They had Rowena's mother, Ida Maker, was the Myers housekeeper, and Eliza Mayo Snow's nurse. Eliza died at age 73 in 1899. Shortly thereafter, Hiram Myers married Rowena's mother, Ida. Hiram died in 1911 at the age of 67 when Rowena was 7 and her sister 4 years old. Edith died from TB at age 21 in 1928, and Ida Baker Myers died in 1958 at the age of 81. Orleans is a closely knit community in the days before World War II. In those days, you walked almost everywhere. There was no TV and only the radio, so it was natural to visit with family and neighbors on a daily basis. In those days, I never felt like a summer person. Of course I was. In fact, I don't think I knew any summer people. My family's friends were the people my dad and his brothers went to school with and grew up with. My mother and I would go by Rowena's house when we walked uptown. We always walked uptown every day to get the mail, which is posted 2 times a day, or go to the library. So it was natural that we visited with Rowena frequently. Rowena had a little craft and gift shop in her home. There she sold her handmade silver jewelry, crocheted gloves, hand-painted toiletry, postcards, books, greeting cards, children's books, Christmas tree ornaments, and occasionally a few antiques that had been in her family. She was extremely modest about her handmade jewelry. She worked mainly in silver with semi-precious stones, big, bold pieces that are reminiscent today to me, of George Jensen style jewelry. She studied design and jewelry making at the Swain School of Design in New Bedford. Her hand-painted tableware and wooden boxes were painted for what she saw out of her window on the cove: the birds, the animals, and the flowers. She was a talented artist and had studied at the Museum School of Fine Arts in Boston. She asked friends to save metal boxes and tins, kind of things cookies and crackers would come in, so she could paint them later with the charming little nature scenes. She recycled long before it was the in thing to do to recycle. She also had a green thumb with plants and flowers. Always a perfectionist, Rowena would talk to the birds and feed them by hand. I love one little story she told us about her pet bird, a thrush, I think, and she named her Marguerite. She would talk to Marguerite, and she said Marguerite would always talk back. They had a conversation going. So when Marguerite would leave in the fall to go south for migration, on her return in the spring, she would tell Rowena all about her adventures that she had had when she'd been away from the cove. I thought that was kind of neat. I believe every word. I also remember Rowena explaining to me, if you're just here in the summer, you never feed the birds. You just give them water, because when you leave, they won't know what to do. They need to know how to forage for themselves. And there's always plenty in the summer. She also loved cats, and somehow her cats never bothered the birds. Brian Bessie told me that when his cat was sick, he'd rather take his cat to Rowena for diagnosis than to the vet. She knew everything. Now, this is important to me because Rowena, she did like and she did enjoy children. When I was 9 or 10 years old, she knew that I was kind of lonesome. I had no brothers and sisters, and she thought it would be nice for me to have a friend. She had met a little girl, just my age, one summer day, when she and her mother had driven down Constance Road to Freeman Lane. I guess it was called Freeman Lane, maybe not. To Freeman Snow's house, where they would buy their eggs and milk and butter, etc. And Freeman Snow's house was at the end of Freeman Lane. That was before there was Snow Point. I know I had some friends here who lived in Snow Point. There's no Snow Point there. Thus, Barbara Patton and I were introduced. Barbara Spouted Temple was a teacher of chemistry and physics at Worcester Academy. So the Patton family was here for the whole summer and did come every summer after summer. As it turned out, Barbara and I had been friends for over 50 years, and she was my maid of honor when Bill and I were married 42 years ago. Barbara had a little sister, 7 years younger, and Cindy was always kind of in the way, so when we were at Rowena, she'd crawl up in Rowena's lap, and she loved to hug and to cuddle. And I remember so well that Rowena just adored her, and she would often say, we called her Cindy, Cindy, you could have been my little girl. It has always been a mystery to me why Rowena never married. She had lots of beaux, was extremely pretty and stylish. Her natural curly hair, slim figure, and beautiful complexion reminded me of the Ivory Soap girl ads in magazines. She wore tailored dresses, like golf dresses, of seersucker, crisp cotton or linen, like the styles we would buy many years ago at Peck & Peck's or Best & Company. My personal feeling is, it's just my personal feeling, is if you married Rowena, you married her mother, too. For example, when dances were held at the town hall with young people, Mrs. Meyers would attend with her daughters. When a young man would ask Rowena or Edith for a dance, Mrs. Meyers would stand up, and the young man would be obligated to dance with her first. Have to dance with mama first. Cindy yard, mowing the lawn, and maintaining a very large yard. Her shop is in the front room of the large yellow house. A little bell attached to the door would jingle as you entered to alert Rowena that a customer was there. She had a glass-enclosed shadow box mounted on a stand in the yard close to the stone wall, displaying her handsome jewelry. This display case attracted the attention of many people passing by, and through the years her customers became lifelong friends. She corresponded with so many people, and her letters were just wonderful. And it was just like having a visit with her. She had a real flair for writing penmanship. This little teeny tiny, everything was just immaculate. Her home, filled with Victorian treasures, had almost not enclosed, but an enchanted, magical, almost mysterious feeling about it, at least to me as a child. I just loved going in there, just like stepping back into another century. The ceilings were very high, probably 12 feet. Yeah. Now, these are just say my childhood memories. They were very common, as I say, probably 12 feet, with gold leaf cornices and velvet draperies. Shears trimmed with lace covered the long, almost to the floor windows. There was a small parlor at right angles behind the shop where she would entertain and visit with her friends. When we came in, Rowena would usually say, wait till Mother comes. I don't want her to miss anything. Or if Mrs. Meyers recognized my mother's voice, and some of you who knew my mother will appreciate this, she would call out and say, don't let Ina talk until I get there. Just don't let her say a thing until I get there. So the news and gossip of our small town quickly got around. I remember it was always easy to make an excuse to use the bathroom upstairs, as the downstairs plumbing was very primitive. It was fun climbing the steep, narrow staircase. It was like an enclosed spiral staircase leading to the second floor. The bathroom had a huge footed tub and a large copper sink set in a marble stand. And the water faucet was open thing, with the tank mounted from the ceiling. And what a lovely view of the town over from that room. Many changes came about following World War II on the Cape, especially to our precious little town of Orleans. The Mid-Cape Highway made the Cape accessible to weekend and day trippers, and we were suddenly invaded by tourists. It seemed shopping centers, malls, hotels, and fast food restaurants setting up overnight. It would never be the same again. It really hasn't. It could never be the same again. Many of the landmarks from my early childhood are gone or drastically changed. Next door to our home, Seacar Farm, once a thriving vegetable and flower garden on 6 acres of land, has become open space with community gardens. Bake Shop Road has been renamed Cove Road, and Knowles' Bakery is now Timbuktu Travel. And T.A. Smith's grocery store, later known as Lloyd's, and then Ellis's, now houses Cape-wide Automotive. Ellis's Market, with new owners, is in the building that was the A&P in the 1950s. The Smith Boy Twins, as the old-timers call them, the Smith Boy Twins hardware store is now a True Value. Howard Johnson's, with its 28 flavors of ice cream, has become a log-cutter restaurant. The post office, Uptown, remember, has had 3 different locations. The southern end is long gone, and the property is now occupied by Bank Boston. A fire destroyed the Snow Library as well as H.K. Cummings' store. The Red Balloon Toy Store was the former home of Marion and Ray Nickerson and their 5 lively daughters. And the Head and Foot Shop was at one time a telephone company with a busy switchboard. When you talked to the operator, you talked with a real live person who knew you and knew your family. And the telephone operator operators have almost as much information about you as any modern-day computer. And somebody would listen in to the conversations, and they really do all the gossip in town. Mayer's Duck Farm, where my dad would always buy a capon. It had to be a capon on a car. They had to go to Mayer's and get a capon. And Barbara Mayer's farm kitchen had vanished, not from memory, but from sight. The Duck Farm property is now known as Countryside, a residential area of expensive homes with $1 million view, which once only belonged to the ducks. Although it snows, the store that has everything has been modernized. I will always cherish the memory of the old store, fondly known as Harry Stone's. Where a little girl's weekly allowance that was docked many, many times, so she didn't have very much to spend, always spent mentally 100 times over before deciding on just the right toy or book or game. With all these changes in our beloved Orleans, the one constant, like the North Star, was Rowena and her big yellow house. They were always there until a few years ago. Although you wished, you knew, deep down in your heart, things would never be the same. A visit with Rowena was always a treat. She didn't mince words, she sure didn't, and kept up to date on all the news. Still, nothing really had changed in the big yellow house. To borrow the title from Thomas Wolfe's last novel, published in 1940, You Can't Go Home Again, I felt I could go home again at Rowena's. Eventually, osteoporosis and the infirmities of age caught up with Rowena, and she had no choice but to move to Brewster Manor. The last time I saw Rowena was just before Thanksgiving, 2 years ago, this coming November. My friend Barbara, now residing in Winnetka, Illinois, and her son Leonard were in Orleans for a few days, so we made plans to go and see Rowena. She had another visit that great afternoon, Mr. Robert Finch. And so when we arrived, we met Robert. Rowena was beginning to tire, so we didn't stay too long. I knew I could see Rowena most any old time because Bill and I had just retired to Orleans. So Barbara and Leonard did most of the visiting. When we left half an hour or so later, I gave Rowena a hug, and I said, I'll be back soon. There are so many things for us to talk about, and she smiled and gave me a hug back. This is not meant to be. Due to the holidays and the numerous snowstorms, I think we had 17 that winter. You know, it never snows in Haven. It does. It doesn't stay around. It is with deep regret and sorrow that I did not have at least one more visit with Rowena. She went into a coma around Christmas time and left us in early January, the 8th of January, during the height of the blizzard of 1996. Now, through the eyes of an adult, I can appreciate what a modern, way ahead of her time lady Rowena was, in so many ways. And yet, in another way, she was trapped by circumstances beyond her control in the past. My life has been enriched for having known Rowena Meyers, and also by the unforgettable memories of Cape Cod summers the way they used to be.
Didn't you do a great job? She was on the phone to me at about 6 o'clock tonight thinking, oh, I can't go through it. How many people do you think we'll have? And I said, well, we only have about 89 or 90 chairs, so that's probably how many we have. It's just terrific to have a standing room only crowd. One story that she related to was how Rowena gave names to different things. But she pointed out to me that the car was named Timothy. And evidently this was her way of personalizing all these items that meant so much to her. Next, I'm going to call on Bill Quinn, who has a little different presentation, because not only is he going to play some of the recordings that he made of Rowena, but he's going to show us some slides also. We're going to need to turn down these center lights, and I think, John, if we can turn the lights off upstairs. Bill, are you going to talk from down here?
No, don't turn the lights off yet.
Okay. Bill Quinn really doesn't need any introduction to people from Orleans. He's going to go down in history as being the only person that was a Grand Marshal twice in 1 year. He was a Grand Marshal at the 4th of July parade. Okay? That equipment?
It's just the equipment. I can talk so everybody can hear me.
Very good.
Hi, Bob. It's tough following a beautiful speaker like Connie, but all your memories brought back a few of my own. There's a big difference between Connie and me. She used to visit her as a little girl. I used to visit as a little boy. Things were a little bit different with little boys. I don't know. Rowena was always a little reticent, a little laid back, and I never got any hugs. But we conversed, because we children used to walk uptown and walk home uptown. And we'd always stop in and see Rowena and her mother. And it was just a thing to do. In later years, I got to know her better because of the history involved. When I got really going on history in Orleans, Rowena told me some fabulous stories. I think she said she was 8 or 9 years old. That would have been in 1912. Anyway, she told me about this huge fire that occurred in Orleans. And it burned from South Orleans all the way to Orleans. And she couldn't remember too many details. And I've been looking for it in the early newspapers, but I haven't been able to find it yet. And she told me many other stories. But the thing that really got me going was the Henry Cummins photographs. And I asked Rowena if she would identify some of them, and she said, certainly, bring them around. And so I brought a couple of them around, and she talked and yacked and this, that, and the other thing, and talked about Uncle Charlie and Aunt Mabel. And I said, wait a minute, Rowena, this is no good. I said, I want to get this on tape so that we know it. And she said, well, you're not going to make a recording of me. I said, well, I've got to make a recording so that, I said, later I can just sit down and write it down, and then I can erase the tape. All right, as long as you erase the tape. Sure we will. I'm not going to play very much of this because once you hear Rowena, you've heard Rowena, but she and I tended to ramble on and get carried away with the different photographs. But in addition, after that, I'll tell you a story about what I know about the car that she told me. And then she gave me, before she died, I was over at the rest home, and we sat and talked for an hour. This was quite a while before right after she was in the rest home, and she had called and said to my wife that she wanted to see me. So I went over there 2 or 3 times, and a couple of times I couldn't get in because she was resting and taking a bath or something. And I had to catch her on the fly when I was driving back from Hyannis. But anyway, she told me that she gave me these slides. She said, I want you to have these. And these were slides that I had made up from some old pictures. Anyway, let me play you some of Rowena.
It was like the other schools. Y'all so small.
Yeah. Okay. Samuel Rogers' house. You know where that was?
This is,
Where the Village Green is now.
oh, yes, that's something. This is the house that they rented.
Yeah. This is Route 28 over here. And
It was a very pretty house, it was a attractive house.
no, that was there when I was a boy. Now, did they tear that down? Or?
Yes. It was rented, the cases were there. No, and after that, the Youngs, Cyrus Young, Daniel,
This one says Old Wellesley, E.E. Eldridge Old House, East Howard. Now, we got a bucket down there and then take this thing and put it back and forth.
I've seen that before.
Oh, there's this.
He wrote that on there.
Yeah, that's his description. W. Hogg House. Now, that's across the town, and it's North Shore.
Well, Miss Barnes?
This is across from Miss Barnes.
Yes. The one that Miss Two owned.
Yeah. The two masters offshore.
Oh, every time we look, they don't talk very well.
No, they don't.
But every time we look, we'll see
Yeah.
Anyway, that was Rowena, and that went on for hours. We rambled on and on and on, and talked and talked, and I didn't pick out any particular piece. I just picked out one the way you could hear her clearly. On that same day, I was talking to her about her car. Previous to my visit with her back in the, sometime in the early 60s, late 60s, I think, or early 70s, I was doing a story. I used to work for the Boston television stations doing news film. And Shelby Scott from Channel 4 was down, and we had finished a job, and we were going to another job, and Rowena drove by. And she said, is that one of the antique historic cars? I said, no, that car is owned by the original owner. She bought it back 50 years ago, and she's been driving it ever since. And Shelby said, my God, let's do a story on her. So I went up and I saw Rowena, and I told her. And she said, well, I don't go for these newfangled ideas. She said, you can shoot a picture of my car, but you can't shoot me. So we canceled the whole thing. And later on, she told me about the car. I asked her questions about it, and she said that it was a few years after she bought it in Chatham. The day she bought the car, she was over there shopping, and she was looking at the car on the showroom floor. I think this is the way she told me. Poor memory, you know? But anyway, she was talking to the salesman, and the salesman told her that not to buy that car. And she said, why not? She says, because it's a yellow car. And she says, I like yellow. And he says, well, he says, people own these cars for a couple of years and trade it back in. And the fishermen don't like the yellow cars, so don't buy that car. So she bought the car. And she said, I didn't know him tell me what to do. And she said, besides, I like the yellow car. I went to the house. So she said that a few years later she was driving the car and it was not working right. And so she took it to Chatham, and an amateur mechanic said, oh, you need a new radiator. You got water in the oil, or oil in the water, I forget which. So she said, well, order me a new radiator, and I'll come back in a couple of weeks and have it put on. So a couple of weeks later she came back, and the service manager was there, somebody that nobody was doing, and told her that, oh no, you don't need a new radiator, you need a new head gasket to keep the oil or the water from leaking into the oil. So she said, well, fine. And he said, well, I'll send that radiator radiator back? And she said, no. She said, I will probably need it someday. So this is the story she told me. She's told, I don't know whether she's told other people different stories about the radiator, but it's amazing. So there was a copper radiator. This was before the war. Beautiful copper radiator. And so 10 or 12 years later, she used to get out of Judah Eldridge's. Now, for those of you who don't know where Judah Eldridge is, you know where Nelson Green is now. That was Judah Eldridge's garage. And so she went down there and the radiator was leaking. So Judah told her that she had a new radiator and it would cost big bucks. And she said, oh no, I have one at home. So she drove back to her house and got the radiator and took it down there. And she says, Judah's chin dropped to his chest when he looked at that beautiful copper radiator, which of course at that point in time you could never buy because they were always making them out of steel. But anyway, now what I'd like to do is to, I have many memories of Rowena and some of the times we chatted, but I'd rather listen to Bob Finch. And so I'll show you her pictures. You want to cut those lights? Let's see if it, yeah, the projector works beautiful. You want to cut them lights? Okay. Okay. Who can pick out Rowena? She's there. That's it. Okay, look for the prettiest girl. Right in the middle. That was when she was a young girl. Now I'm going to whip through these real quick so that, and I'll try to explain each one as we go. There are several different class pictures in her collection. Obviously, she would probably be in each one of them. I never bothered to pick her out. This is a little bit older girl, and a little bit older girl. She's probably in here somewhere. Maybe her sister. Now, some of the pictures she had were of these houses, and you'll notice that the whole family is out here in front of the house having a picture taken. Maybe parents, the kids, the older people. Then they go around the back and do the same thing. And of course, you can see the crops are growing here. So everybody had to grow their own food. This is George Horton's horse. No, wait a minute. Fielding's horse. George Horton was the one before. This is Bill Knowles' house. I don't know if this is the house down in Rock Harbor or whether it's the one that used to be up at the corner of Main Street and 28. I can't tell because they were both the same. This is the cedar pond. Why somebody is standing out there? I don't know. Perhaps that was the thing to do in those days. This is the baseball team. Now this was the center of all these. Those of you who are what we call Tony-come-latelys, Russian Shores or whatever, this is Main Street and all these right here. This is the snow block. Huge building. It's gone now. It's torn down. This is the once the jewelry store and everything. And, it burned down. This building is still there. That's the restaurant. And this building here was the when I grew up, it was known as the Board of Trade building because it had another floor on top of it. But I don't know that this was Snow's store baseball team. I think it was Snow's factory, patch factory. There's a patch factory here. So I'm assuming that the baseball team was from George Snow's patch factory, which was just down the street from Snow's store. I guess the garden center is there now. Stan, is that the garden, where the garden center is now? Stan Snow is up back here. Can you hear me?
Yes, it is, Bill.
That was done by.
Okay, let's put through these real quick now. This is the windmill on the hill. And I was wondering whether it was the J. Young Mill or the windmill down in East Orleans, but I noticed this windmill here, and that's indicative of the J. Young Mill, that window. And this is the windmill with all those panes in it. So that's the Jonathan Young windmill up on top of the hill where the Governor French Motel is now. Now this is the railroad station in Orleans. This was really famous in the early days. Austin wagon, trucks, and Connie said that we were, after World War II, we were inundated with summer tourists. Well, we were inundated with summer tourists before World War II. I can attest to that. There's another picture of the railroad station.
What was that, Bill?
What?
What was that located?
This? Right up in Summertown, across from the, let's see, what is the Mid-Cape Center now, today. And this, and the road going right through it now, would be what it's called. So that was, and these, yes. Well, I don't know. When I was a boy, I used to see people with horses going up to town. Charlie Howard Mayo used to go uptown with his horse every day until he got an old Chevrolet. You all know that's the church. There's Rowena's house right there. And this is either a light pole or a telephone pole. Probably telephone. This is a little early for electric lights, I think. The French cable station here in Orleans. People taking cranberries, probably the cold bog because of the cable house up there. There's the solar here in Orleans. That's what it used to look like. David Stokes was $5,000 way back when. This is Main Street in Orleans. There's the, I told you about the World Trade Building with the second floor. This is a barber shop here. Malcolm Steele, and then Phil Peterson owned it. And when my little boy was 3 years old, his mother finally bit the bullet and said, "All right, gave his first haircut." He had curls all over. It was just like a little girl. Sometime I'll have to bring that film now. Film of Phil and the first haircut. And the transformation from what looked like a little girl to a little boy. When he got through, he was starting to step down and Phil passed the lollipop. Everything was fine. So this is Snow's store here. Looks like a scale of some kind. Maybe a way pole or something. Okay, this is the Lockwood Gardens. Probably somewhere in South Orleans. You never heard of it before? What? It's the burger. It is? Well, there's a Lockwood Gardens. Down at the corner of Rock Harbor Road, Main Street, and Locust Road is the Orleans Cash Store. east entrance, you went by boat. This is the way you went. You didn't go over the road. This was the packing vessel on the Rock Harbor.
Okay? Let's listen to Paul.
Bill, we thank you very much for your comments and especially sharing the slides with us.
You want me to leave?
No, I think we can turn that one on.
Want me to leave her on while Bob is talking? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm very pleased to introduce Robert Finch to you this evening. Many of us have read his columns in the newspaper, and some of us have checked out the books that he's produced. He's a naturalist, a historian, a humanist, and evidently a very good friend of Rowena Meyers. So he's going to share some of his know-how or experiences with her. Robert?
Thank you, Lynn. This is very strange, you know. This is a day I thought would never come, or I hoped would never come. Like Connie, I felt that Rowena was a fixture. She was something that was always there and always would be there, and I think there are a number of people in this room who felt the same way. And like Connie, I have a feeling that she would have disapproved highly of this gathering. She would have hated it. But on the other hand, I think she would have been the first to admit that it didn't matter anymore what she thinks. She always says, when you're here, and when you're gone, you're gone. Well, she certainly was always here, and I think she's still here, and I think it's right that we celebrate her life. I'm very grateful to Lynn for asking me to participate in this, and to Connie for her memories, and also for her fine capsule biography of Rowena and her family. That relieves me of the burden of facts. And to Bill for his memories, and particularly for giving you a chance to hear Rowena's voice a little bit. It was a very distinctive old Cape Cod voice. And with this picture up here, and maybe with the sound of her voice in your ear, it will help me do what I want to do tonight. I first met Rowena in the fall of 1971, when I first came back to Cape Cod to live. At the time, I wanted to live in Orleans. In fact, I wanted to live on Main Street, which at the time I thought was the best street in the world. And one of the reasons I wanted to live there was Rowena. Even after my first couple of meetings with her, I knew that she was an extraordinary individual, and that what she was a living memory of the town. What you heard tonight in Bill's tape is a very rare document because, as Connie said and Bill said, she did not like to be recorded and refused almost all requests to do so, mine included. And the reason she gave me was that she said if she was on tape, she'd be inhibited. Now, if you know Rowena, you know what she means by that. She was very candid in her opinions, in her comments. She didn't mince words. And so what I would do over the 25 years that I knew her, I would try to listen as hard as I could. And then when I left, I immediately went and tried to scribble down as much as I could remember, word for word, what she had said. And what I've done is to, it kind of forced me to do this. I've been meaning to do it for some time. I've gone through all my journals and culled out the Rowena material. Don't worry, it's far too much to present tonight. But what I've done is try to arrange them in 3 different categories, and I'll read you a few stories from each one, because I remember her primarily as a storyteller. I think she was one of the great storytellers of this town. So I'm going to try to give you her words as much as possible without my intermediary comments, so you have a sense of what it was to sit in that front room with Rowena and listen to her remember 90 years of Orleans history. So this is a little bit of Rowena Unplugged, if you will. The first category I had, I call stories of the old days. This is about things that happened before I came. And she had incredible, almost total recall. It was amazing. I'll start with one that was one of my favorite stories, and a version of it was used in Janine Perry's wonderful bicentennial play, but I thought maybe you'd like to hear it through her words. And this is the story of Wilbur Isaac Small, who was better known to Miss Meyers as Peaky Willie. This is one of the earliest stories I have. This is from 1972, and at the time I was trying very hard to find a house to rent or to buy to stay in year-round here. And she suggested that I might have more luck finding a house if I shaved my beard. She was always criticizing me. She didn't like men with beards. And she told me a story of her youth, of the kind of men she associated with beards. These are her words. This man lived over on Hopkins Lanes, had a beard. There were only 2 houses on Hopkins Lane then. He shaved it off in the spring and grew it back every winter. He wasn't quite right, you know, didn't have all his buttons. We called him the Peeper, because he used to go around peeking in windows when he got intoxicated. His boast was that he never had to sleep at night. Of course, we didn't think much of that, as he never did anything anyway and was always taking naps. Well, one day, some newspaper fellows got a hold of him and took him to New York. They put him up in a hotel and fed him and took him to shows, even got some chorus girls to sit on his lap. They followed him everywhere and never let him out of their sight, and he never slept a wink through all of it. Well, they got him pretty famous and planned a big party to welcome him back to Orleans. But when they got in, no one was there, only Miss Baker, who ran the train station. Newspaper people asked her why nobody showed up, and she said, "Oh, everybody's too busy figuring out how we're going to keep him off charity this winter." Well, that's to show you the kind of man I associated with beards. One of her favorite topics, of course, was marriages, relationships between men and women. And the story she told me one time, we were talking about her woodlot. She owned a woodlot that had belonged to her parents in East Brewster, and 4 acres or so. And we got to talking about woodlots in general and how important they used to be. They were, in fact, considered a large part of a woman's dowry and a man's prospects. She told me a wonderful story about a friend of her mother's who had married a man with considerable woodlot property. After a few years, their financial situation worsened, and one day she said to him, "Henry, perhaps you should consider selling some of our woodlots." "Woodlots?" he replied. "Woodlots. Pshaw, that was just corporate talk." Now, this story I owe to Janine Perry, who got to know Rowena in her last years and shared some stories with her. Janine at that time was trying to research the property that's now part of Nickerson State Park. Frank and Sarah Crosby were not so fortunate in their finances as Frank's wealthy brother Albert. Sarah, Miss Meyers said, was fond of animals and kept many horses, cats, and dogs. In fact, they both like to go to the harness races in Yarmouthport, where it is said Frank's betting may have led to his filing for bankruptcy. Rowena said that after Frank died, Sarah Crosby moved back to Orleans, where she ran a boarding house. Janine said she had heard that Sarah later remarried a man named Fitzgerald. Rowena said, "Oh, him. He was one of her boarders. She only took men for boarders, you know." "Why was that?" asked Janine. "I don't know. I guess she just wasn't a very good housekeeper, didn't want to be bothered. She was very mannish, you know, liked to wear men's clothes. She wished she should have been born today." She continued to keep animals, though, and when they died, she had many of them stuffed and used to put them out on her lawn as a kind of early and eccentric form of yard art. Rowena said, "I used to like to drive by and see what was out." Janine asked her if she stuffed her horses. "Yes, but I never saw them. The worms must have got them or something." Once, she said, Brad Clark, who ran the Packet Antique Shop in West Brewster, came to see Sarah about purchasing some items she had for his shop. She came to the door and found him looking rather apprehensively at the stuffed animals in the yard. "Oh, don't worry about that dog," she said. "He's been dead for years." Oh, yes. Well, you know, many of you who talked to Rowena knew that she had her series of boys. Boys were her handymen who would do jobs for her. And she called every one of them her boy, even though they might be older than she was, in her 60s and 70s. And one of her favorite boys was John. And she said he was one of the Marine boys who came to Orleans in the First World War to protect the cable station and were trapped, in her words, by homely and sometimes retarded local girls. And by the smells at noon from G. Knowles' Bake Shop. You know how hungry you are when you're 18. Well, I too had the privilege of spending some time with Rowena looking at the Henry K. Cummings photo collection in the Snow Library. A couple of winters we used to go there. And I'm afraid I was not a very good scribe. I should have been taking notes like furious, so that I'd have all these facts about them that I could pass on. But I was much more interested in listening to her and her stories. You should know that, before we went to the Snow Library, she asked me to bring her to the post office. She had to get some stamps or something. And we went in, and you know the large blow-ups of the Cummings photos, which are around the post office, which have captions underneath them. Well, we went in, and for about the first 5 minutes, Rowena and I just walked around. Rowena was saying, "Well, now they got that wrong. That's not so-and-so. That isn't right. That's him." I have to take history with a grain of salt. Anyway, I did transcribe a few stories, and I even managed to take a number of the photos so that we can link these up with them somewhat later. For instance, number 15 is a photo of what she identified as the old lamplighter. She said shows an old kerosene lamp in the foreground. The women in Orleans raised the money to put them in the center of town, and the first street lighter was old Ambrose, the deaf mute. We used to follow him around in the evening. Some of the lamps were pretty dirty. Of course, he only had an old rag to clean them with. They were only kept on until 10 p.m., and on moonlight nights, not at all. Number 45 is a photo of Dr. Davis's house. And this is what she had to say about that. Dr. Davis was a bachelor, so he was pretty popular with the ladies, with the men too. Orleans was always a dry town in those days, even before Prohibition. But doctors could always get liquor to prescribe to their patients for medicinal purposes. Dr. Davis had a regular clientele downstairs. Every now and then he would leave off seeing patients and go down cellar, put on an apron, and serve the customers. He was deaf, of course, and couldn't hear them, so the men would hold up one or two fingers, depending on how sick they felt. Sometimes you'd just go into the office and you could hear the corks popping downstairs. 438 was a picture, well, I don't know, I assume it was a house. In front of it was a little girl named Edna Taylor. The picture was dated 1887. At the time, this must have been the early 1980s, she said Edna was still alive in the Brewster nursing home. She said that she went with her husband into the home to be with him. Her mind was fine, but he didn't know what time of day it was. Those places aren't good for your mind, you know, and hers soon went. And finally, I'll read this. This is from number 247, when she said shows Mrs. Beatty. I didn't get a first name, B-E-E-D-Y. She was timid, you know. She had a satchel with a bullet hole through it that she got on a train trip to Chicago when she was young. A couple in her car were having an argument when the man started shooting up everything and put a bullet right through the bag. We think that kind of spooked her. She was terribly afraid of thunderstorms. Mother used to go over and stay with her evenings during storms. She would take off her hoop skirt and stuff them and all her knitting needles in the closet so they wouldn't attract lightning. You can see where I spent every chance I got. But I have to say, and there are more, but she told no more fascinating story about the old days and Henry Cummings photos than the story she told me about Henry Cummings himself. And I've never printed this anywhere, but I'd like to share it with you tonight. This was her story of Henry Cummings. I went to see Miss Meyers last Friday and asked her about Henry Cummings, the turn-of-the-century Orleans photographer whose documents many of the residents' houses, local scenes, and landscapes of that time, blow-ups of which adorn the Orleans post office. Turns out he was her neighbor, though he was brought up in the Captain Linnell house on Scape Beach Road. He owned the Eagle Wing house just past the vacant lot on the Cove. Though she admitted the historical value of his work, she poo-pooed him as a photographer, calling his work overrated, and that we didn't think much of him. Though I gathered later that this was for reasons other than the quality of his photographs. He took over the dry goods store in the center of town, where the Lamb Ho building now is, but he wasn't very interested in running it. She said that as a clerk he was very nervous and wouldn't spend much time with you, so he used to wait until he wasn't there to go in. He fell in love with a school teacher, you know, she said, as though it were common knowledge today. One Phoebe Steer, who later became Phoebe Brown. Phoebe came to Orleans as a school teacher, married Mr. Brown, and then got interested in Henry. It lasted for 50 years. She was always needing money, and Henry supplied it to her. Everyone knew about it. His poor wife, she was a pain, P-A-I-N-E. His poor wife tried to pretend, but she used to come over here and cry to Mother that she didn't know what she was going to do. Whenever they went on a trip, Mrs. Brown would go along. At this point, I had visions of entries in the local papers. Orleans notes, Mr. and Mrs. H.K. Cummings of Orleans and their traveling companion Phoebe Brown spent an intimate weekend in Lenox. Mrs. Cummings reported that the autumn foliage was beautiful. I had to do that. But I did, I got that image. And now this is Rowena again. Usually these things don't last long, you know. Of course, we all blamed her. If she'd left him alone, he would have gotten over it. She showed me a remarkable photo she had, one of H.K.'s old prints from the Rowena Meyers collection, she said. It showed 3 young women in hats, jackets, and long skirts standing calf-deep in the middle of a flooded main street just up the road from her house. She identified the woman on the right as Mrs. Cummings, the one in the middle as Phoebe, and the third as another school teacher. Mrs. Cummings looked solid, dumpy, with a sheepish grin on her face. Phoebe had a strange beauty about her. Dark eyes, swept-up hair, the kind of face that captures men's souls, not their eyes. The woman on the left, with curly hair, is leaning jauntily against an elm tree and is the most strikingly pretty of the 3. Only Phoebe, has not bothered to lift her skirts out of the water. Old Joe Cummings, H.K.'s father, said Rowena, was a womanizer too, so I guess it ran in the family. He wasn't a good seaman, he was just lucky. But I asked, how did the affair go on so long if everyone knew about it? Oh, everyone knew everything about everyone's business then. But most of those things didn't last. Everyone was after someone, it seemed. There was poor Mary so-and-so who had made a bad marriage, who walked past the cable station several times a day trying to attract the attention of Mr. Nipper, one of the Englishmen stationed there. Of course, he wasn't at all interested in her. My, but she suffered, all full of passion and loneliness. I guess people didn't get divorced so much in those days, I said. They couldn't afford it. So, I thought, old H.K. had a muse. Though she obviously disapproved of their behavior, she told the story with obvious relish, and I thought some grudging admiration, not for the fact of the affair, which she would never have approved, but that it lasted so long. A part of her always admired people who stuck to things, no matter what they were. It showed integrity, if not morality. I'll end with her words. Today, I suppose his wife would have done something, gotten a divorce. They talk about how divorces are on the rise today, but a lot of people would have gotten divorced then if it had been popular. Many were, in fact, in all but name. His wife died first, and when he died, he left everything to her, Phoebe Brown, so she got the house, too, in the end. I'll read you just a couple of the second set of stories which I put together, which I call Stories of Rowena's Youth. And there are a number of these, so I'll just pick out a couple. This is one she told about the U-boat incident off Nauset Beach in World War I. Very famous incident, supposedly the only recorded account of foreign shells actually landing on American soil in World War I. So, this is her story of the Nauset U-boat incident. One day she gave me an envelope full of clippings from the Boston Globe dated July 22nd, 1918, about the German U-boat bombing of Nauset Beach, and then proceeded to tell me about the event from her viewpoint. She was 14 at the time. It was Sunday, and she and her older sister Edith were going to Sunday school at the Universalist Church, now the Historical Society building. We heard the noises, she said, the explosions going on down at the beach, but we didn't know what they were and didn't care. I didn't like the war, and we were only concerned with picking out a pretty dress to wear to church. I thought of W.H. Auden's poem, Musée des Beaux-Arts, in which, looking at Bruegel's painting of Icarus falling into the sea, he muses about how the old masters knew that even when momentous events occur, quote, there always must be children who did not specially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood, or I thought, dressing for church. We had a woman preacher at the time, she said. We were in class when Betsy Brown bought the news about the bombing. Betsy's mother was the one who was Henry Cummings' mistress for so many years. That was a running thread. We ran to the barred windows hoping to see something, but of course we didn't. Mrs. Cummings was the organist, and she about died when she couldn't leave to go out there. She loved adventure, you know. Did you go see it? I asked. No, it was too far, and not too many people had cars in. A few shells landed on the bluffs at Nauset Heights. There were only a few summer houses out there, and Dr., and I didn't get the name, so-and-so was the only one with a cellar. They herded the women and children down there, but of course the children escaped one by one to watch the shelling. A little bit, maybe her comments about her father and her sister Edith. And if you think about that family, it's extraordinary. Her father was born in 1844, and Rowena died in 1996. So you think the time period that just 2 generations spanned in that family. Her father, as you know, was the principal of the Orleans School and taught there too, earning $1,000 a year, plus $75 a year for being a librarian in the old Snow Library in Academy Place before it burned down. There hasn't been a man in house since May of 1911, she said, the month my father died. Rowena had to be the man. A hint of self-mocking resentment here, and so Rowena was. She talked a lot about her sister, Edith, who was younger than her by 3 years, but was obviously her closest companion. She called Edith her best friend, and she would say that how they faced the world together, particularly boys. We never worshipped boys, you know, my sister Edith and I. We just had fun with them. We always double dated. When a boy asked Edith out, he always knew there'd be another couple along. Then Edith died, and for a while I tried dating with other girls, but they were all those TE types, always talking about how to get boys to like them. After a while I decided I was better off going alone, so I did. I asked her what she thought might have happened if Edith had lived, and she replied without hesitation, "Oh, we'd have gone into business together." Unlike most sisters, we really liked one another. We wouldn't have gotten rich, but we'd have been good at it. Edith was so good with people, and I was good with money. She had the drive, and I had the caution. We would have made a formidable pair. Everyone would have talked about the Meyers sisters. It's funny to think how different our lives might have been if some people hadn't died. Yes, my father, for instance, always planned to write a history of Orleans, but he died before he started it. He died too young. He was going to teach me German, too. We always went riding together every day after school in our horse and buggy. They appreciated him here. There was no nonsense about him. As the school principal, he had to deal with the Cape Cod boys who went to sea in summer when they were 12, so they thought they knew everything. At the end of the summer, they came home and went to school. On the first day, he would say to them, "We're here to work. If anyone thinks he doesn't want to work, he can leave now." My sister Edith and I had lots of boyfriends hanging around. Too many, I guess. When you have too many, you aren't that eager to get married. It doesn't seem worth it. But when you only have 2 or 3, why, you pick the best one and hope. I mentioned how my daughter Katie and Peter Shaw, who were going off to college, would miss each other, that they were good friends, but nothing more than that. "Oh, yes," she said, "that was common then. My sister and I had pals, boys who would have over to the house. I think that's why so many of them went on to have good marriages." They liked my mother a lot. One of them told me, "She makes me believe." Another time, I had the audacity to ask her why she never married. She replied, "Oh, I don't know. It seems that when the boys were interested in me, I wasn't interested in getting married. And by the time I was, they weren't interested in me anymore." So there you have it. Her words. You take a couple more? Okay, well, just a couple from the last category. And these are stories that I either observed while I knew her, or that she told about contemporary events that were taking place. So this brings it up. She made some comments about her house, which I always found fascinating. This is one, I don't have the date on this, but this is: "Stopped in to see Miss Meyers for the first time in a while. She is looking well enough, but more tired. Says her boy John doesn't help her on the house so much anymore. She has cared for that large place alone now for 18 years, but has a sense of humor about it. She said Lucy Mayo asked her to serve on the Historical Society's exhibit committee, but she said, 'No thanks, I've got a museum of my own.'" She referred to the side parlor as the Lincoln Room. That's what our neighbor always called it, she said, because it looked the same as it had when Lincoln died. This, she said, was a slight exaggeration, since the paper was put up in 1883. Technically, it should be the Garfield Room. Another one of her little quips. A first cousin, I don't know, a first cousin once removed, had mentioned to her that she was thinking of taking up pottery. "Do housework," she advised her. "It pays more and you have your afternoons free." Although she never married, she certainly knew how to handle men and manipulate them when necessary. And this is a story I have from her from 1984. Says a lot about her, I think. Visited Miss Meyers again on Friday before Christmas. Her coal furnace, bought in 1935, has broken down and she has been without heat for several weeks now. This is in January. She is kept warm with her kerosene stove in the kitchen and Franklin wood stove in the workroom or dining room. I burned half a cord, she said. She'd been sleeping in the kitchen on an army cot, but the day before it had warmed up and so she could go back upstairs and sleep in sheets. The furnace man had been slow in bringing in the new furnace, so she has gotten after him a bit, telling me with a twinkle in her eye how she had said to him, "Wasn't it terrible to leave a poor old woman of 80 without heat over Christmas?" Of course, I didn't care that much, but sometimes you have to say those things. And I love this one. This is from 1985, and I call it The Painter Who Thinks He's Good. Rowena is having her house repainted. This is in 1985. The barn is half primed with white. Parts of the house have the windows covered with ripped plastic. Ladders are lying around the yard gathering leaves. This is in November. The house was dark, the outer door locked, and no response to the bell. The cove stormy and whipped up by a stiff breeze. A bit worried, I called at her after we got home. She was there, of course, stripping and priming shutters in the barn. "Is this Bob?" "Yes, well, I knew the barn would still be warm from yesterday, but would be cold this afternoon. These shutters are so much work. I've done them since 1930, since I got the car. They're heavy, though, and since John died a few years back, I let them go. But I figure I can't earn 50 cents an hour painting my tin trays, so here I am." "Oh, yes, I'm well. I have to be. Who'd do the work?" "The painter? Well, his name is..." I'm not going to give it. But he's really Portuguese. Lived most of his life in Orleans. A couple of widow friends recommended him, said he was quite good. Well, he thinks he's good. He and his son began in September, would you believe? Then he took October off as a vacation. And you know what nice painting weather we had in October. My, the grass. I haven't done anything but mow since July. It almost got the best of me this year. I usually look forward to August when it's too hot and dry to grow, but not this year. So now he's back, and I said to him, "We never painted when it got below 50 degrees. "Oh, yes, it's fine," he says, "so I suppose he'll be painting in the snow." This fellow's just waiting to be 65. "Oh, yes, I heard the parade, watched it out of the barn window." It was the Veterans Day parade. "If we all worked as hard as that Jesus band, this would be a pretty town." He's a Jehovah's Witness, you know, the painter. I always have them coming to the door. They show me pictures of their paradise. He showed it to me, too, all the animals together, everything in bloom, always nice, warm, sunny weather. He believes it's coming soon, so maybe it doesn't matter if the paint peels. I don't know who's going to do all the work in paradise, but it won't be him. And I'm going to read you two more, and then I'll stop. One of the few times I actually sat around and shared stories about Rowena with other people was, unfortunately, after the burial of her ashes up in the cemetery. She didn't want any kind of memorial service. I suppose this is as close as we're getting to it. And it was just a few close friends who came up to see the ashes buried. And then we went back to Bill and Ruth Hayes' house, who were her neighbors, and really, I think the people closest to her in her last year, and they did an amazing number of kind and compassionate acts for her. I'm very grateful to them for taking care of her. And I hope you won't mind if I tell just a couple of stories that you told them. I don't think it's good. I don't think it'll be revealing anything she wouldn't want revealed. This was from Bill. This is when I was listening to the stories I wrote later. "It was good to hear stories of people getting her to do things I never could. The Hayes had a birthday party for her in her later years, at which they got her to drink a glass of champagne, which she had never tasted, and she liked it. Once, when the old half cape up the street had been bought by an artist, Bill got Rowena to agree to go over to a party there, but only on the condition that you'll get me out of it in half an hour. But she got dressed to the nines. She wore a nice two-piece dress, makeup, a little rouge. She was a knockout and she knew it, said Ruth. And she grinned widely when Bill complimented her on her looks. When she got there, she stayed for hours, holding court. She would put a piece of cardboard in the window in her last years if there was an emergency, so that Bill would come over, though sometimes he said the emergency was a mouse. Rowena was what used to be called land poor, that is, the owner of valuable property with little income to maintain it. After several years, he finally convinced her to accept the town's tax lien program, which, in lieu of taxes, put a lien on the estate. He brought over the forms to sign, where it said marital status, she had written in old maid. For God's sake, Rowena, said Bill, you can't write old maid. Put down single. No, she said, I won't. That's what I am, an old maid and never been touched, she said. I think it was something that allowed her to continue to think of all of us men, regardless of our ages, as little boys. And finally, I'm going to close with a story about Timothy, her car, that thanks to Henry Sears is out there for you to see. She told me many stories about cars over the years, but this one seems to me to sum up a lot about Rowena and maybe summarizes the spirit of this night. This is in 1990, and it was just before we were going over to the Snow Library to look at some more of Cummings' pictures. Before we went to the library, Miss Meyers asked me to come in. She wanted me to take a look at Timothy, her old 1930 Model A. I said that I had never heard her call the car Timothy before. It had always been Timmy. Well, she said, we always used to call him Timmy, but when he got to be 50 years old, I thought he should be called Timothy. It's more dignified. So we went into the dark shed in the barn where the car was always kept. She had me open the door a little, and there was Timothy, with a new coat of paint on him. He had been at Henry Sears and Brewster for the past several months, and you could tell that she was glad to have him back, even though she told me that she plans to give Timothy to Henry, that she just can't afford to pay all those bills to keep him up anymore. The car had been at Henry's to have a fender repaired that was damaged in an accident last summer, and she didn't realize that he was going to repaint the whole car, but it looked very nice, and she was pleased. It was a dark blue, a very handsome blue, that she called a Packard blue. The car was originally yellow, so she said that Timothy had gotten a new coat. Then she pointed to the wheel spokes, which had also been painted, and she said that Timothy had a new pair of shoes. But the top, the canvas top, it was the third top the car had not been replaced that time, so he didn't have a new hat. And the upholstery inside was still old, so he didn't have new underwear. But the whole experience of being away had taught him a lesson. So I asked her what that was, and she said, well, he was always unhappy at being home so much. He didn't get out very much and didn't get much attention when he was home. And she hadn't been taking him out. When he went out, all the girls would make him fuss over him. At home, he didn't get that kind of attention, and so he was missing that. But now he had learned a lesson, and he was glad to be home, although he was parked in head first, which he didn't like because then he couldn't look out on the street. She wasn't able to back him in anymore. She was telling all this in her usual flat, matter-of-fact voice, and I began to wonder, was she really beginning to get a little dotty? But at the end, she had a twinkle in her eye and gave a little giggle and a smile and said, you have to make up stories, just to keep going. Thank you.
of Rowena's files or clippings, newspaper clippings that she saved over the years, have come to the Historical Society, and our director, John Howard, is in the process of sorting through them. And interestingly enough, he came across the information that at the time of her graduation from high school, she was the person who gave the class prophecy this afternoon, and I thought he could very briefly summarize it, and you're going to have to project there from the balcony what she had to say about herself. John?
Okay, I couldn't find it. Thank you much. This is a copy of the Oriole, which is volume 1, number 1 of a school newspaper, like yearbook. It's kind of more like a yearbook. It was put out by Orleans High School. It was 1923, the year Rowena graduated. And as Lynn said, she wrote the class prophecy, and I think the way she ended it, it's kind of bittersweet, but it says a lot about the person that Rowena was. She writes, I anxiously awaited the next picture which would tell of my own future, but in my great disappointment, no picture appeared. Fate illuminates the crystal at will, and so my own lot is left until I reside in a castle so grand, I'll sell hot dogs at a peanut stand.
Thank you, John. I'm sure we could call on different people to tell us something about Rowena Meyers or experiences they might have had in knowing her through the years. But I'm a little bit hesitant to open it up to discussion because I'm sure there are many, many stories. But maybe we can take just a couple minutes to have some insight or some personal experiences. I see somebody nodding or shaking. Eileen, could you comment? No? Is there anyone who has? Yes, up and back. Please speak loudly so we can record it.
Yes, my family knew Rowena Meyers for 2 or more generations. And I used to go and call on her as a child and found it the greatest treat to go into her studio and be allowed to pick out something that she had made, either to buy it as a gift or for myself. She told me, and I called on her over the years, and she told me that when my father, who's the late registrar, came to Cape in the summer with his parents, we used to go to the Friday night dances that somebody spoke of here. I don't know if that was Bob or
Connie spoke about it.
Connie, yes. And she said, you know, he was the best mannered boy. He walked Edith and me home from the dance each time, and which I was pleased to hear. Also, I remember the last years that her mother was living, and my father verified this, had told me this earlier on. When Mrs. Meyers wanted either of her daughters to come upstairs, she'd sit in her bedroom and knock her cane on the floor so hard that you would think, you know, that it was coming through the floor. And she would then excuse the came calling. Leave. Now, another connection that I will tell you about was her relationship with John, the boy, John. John was a master carpenter in this town and who worked even at my place until he was 83 years old. And he used to talk about Rowena all the time, and he recalled how he first came to Orleans as a Marine guard at the French cable station. And I think he was still a great admirer of Rowena's up until the day he died. Because I used to joke with him and I said, "Look, John, are you serious about Rowena?" You know, he'd known her since he was 18 years old. And he said, yes. I said, "Why didn't you marry her?" He said, "She wouldn't have me." She wouldn't have me. He said, because the Marines guarding the French cable station had a very racist reputation. Local girls. Anyway, I think, I think that's all the recollections that would be of any kind of general interest, but she was a character. Character of the best sort. And, you know, one of those people that you always connect with Orleans and will always have lovely memories.
Well, thank you very much. Would you identify yourself for the recording?
It's Varna Spring.
Okay. One more story. Anyone got a special comment? Yes, Ruth Hayes.
Referring back to the story that Bob told about Rowena and I going down to the artist studio that day, when she came down the driveway to pick me up and looked like $1 million, Bill was working in his driveway and looked up and he said, "My God, Rowena, you look beautiful." He said, "How about afterwards you and I go up to the land house?" And she smiled and she said, "That's the deal." Well, of course, that was the end of it. We went up and Bob told the story about how she was so popular at that Doubtful showing. Many, many years later, when she was in the nursing home, when Bill would go to see her, he'd put her in the wheelchair and take her for a ride to get her out of the room and go out to the air or whatever. So she got into the wheelchair, and as they passed the nurse's station, she looked up at them and said, "Well," she said, "I'm off. I don't know if I'll be back because Bill's taking me to the land."
Well, that's a wonderful story to end up with. There are a couple things that I really must share with you. Just bear with me for a moment or two. Many of you, when you came in, found a little slip of paper announcing a combination of a historic trip and a musical trip. You know, there are about 3 women that are involved with activities here at the Historical Society. And if we were ever to establish a company of advisors or experts, I think we would entitle the company DeBoer, Snow, Thompson, because Irene DeBoer and Bonnie Snow and Bobby Thompson can think up more activities that we can do here in town or are related with the history of Massachusetts. Well, Bobby has worked out in cooperation with the Cape Cod Symphony a program of tours that combine music and history. Those bits of information were shared with you. I also want to share with you that on September 28th, which is Sunday afternoon, we have a terrific house tour organized from 1 to 4 p.m. There will be 4 houses that will be open, plus the Orleans Inn will be open, and you will be able to go upstairs to see one of the suites that have been renovated and looks out over the cove. Then you'll be able to come back here for refreshments from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 5. So the house tour is from 1 to 4. You can buy your tickets in advance at $12 a ticket. I do have tickets if you want to buy them in advance. The 4 houses are unique and I think of special interest. One is a brand new house down at the end of Constance Road, which is built right next to the family homestead that was on the tour 2 years ago. Another is a house on Great Oak, I'm sorry, I'll get the trees mixed up here. Right across the road that's right across from Fancy's. That's a house that goes back to 1790, and that will be on tour. Then if you go further out off of Barley Neck, there is a delightful new house that was built about 17 years ago, but built in the old style and has some very exquisite artwork and antiques. Then, if you venture all the way to South Orleans, you will see a house that was made from the stables that were part of the Winslow estate. That's a house on Toby Lane. And that is a delightful, very creative house. So we do have this wonderful opportunity for you to be part of or see part of Orleans, and also in a way supporting the work of the Orleans Historical Society. Now, many of you are here for the first time, and if you would like to become members of the Orleans Historical Society, please pick up one of the little brochures that we have near the entrance, and also pick up a calendar of events that we will be having for the remainder of the year. We are a voluntary organization. We have been very well taken care of as far as the endowment for the preservation of this building, part of which we are very much indebted to Rowena Meyers. We also need your contributions in order to develop programs and help with either acquiring new artifacts for our collection. I've always, in arranging these programs, I always end up with sort of a wish list. And I just wish that we could have a special display case dedicated to Rowena Meyers. And I think somewhere between the photographs that we have and also examples of her artwork, we could come up with a wonderful tribute to this woman. We do have a case dedicated to Margaret Stanger, who was also a very generous benefactor of the Historical Society. So I think on my wish list will be the possibility of doing something special for Rowena Meyers. Now, I know you've been sitting very long, and our refreshment committee has been very ingenious. Because we're overcrowded with chairs and people standing around while we were talking, they moved the refreshments out to the front lawn. So you will be able to have refreshments outside, and I think the spotlights are still on.